this video, I will discuss actions that Agile teams can take to define done for an Agile project. Hello, my name is Neil Potter and I help Agile teams go beyond the basics of Agile software development. Please click below to subscribe for future videos. Many project teams fall behind in their schedules because done for a sprint is not clearly defined. New tasks are then discovered, putting deadlines at risk. Let me share some examples of how to define done. So before we discuss some examples of defining done, let's look at some of the common challenges an Agile team would have in its project. So here's our regular Agile flow, backlog, planning, testing, the demo, retrospectives, and then the end of the sprint. So the first challenge teams have is work is incomplete and many tasks slip into the next iteration. And the problem with this is that if they repeat the cycle, and some discovered tasks go to iteration 2, and then some of those discovered tasks go to iteration 3. It's like a snowball effect, and it is very difficult to maintain a schedule on the project. The team needs to define done. If you see a team defining done, that means the first definition of done didn't work out as well as they wanted to. That is that they declared done and then discovered a bunch of tasks to really be done. And so to overcome that, they labeled it as done. So done is just indicative of the initial done definition not being as complete as it should be. So we'll discuss. And then number 3, schedule estimate is always under because tasks are rediscovered in each iteration. So one of the things you want to do in an Agile team is get to the point where you can do a successful demo and a successful sprint retrospective to kind of get the feedback on the Agile team. And if the team doesn't estimate accurately enough, there can be a lack of time to do these two things correctly and therefore kind of miss the feedback of Agile. So we want to make sure that the done definition is complete and we can estimate it and get to the point at the end of the iteration to have done the demo and testing and retrospectives and then replan the next iteration. Now, there are 3 examples of where done occurs in Agile. Firstly, the user story done. Secondly, iteration or sprint done. And thirdly, the release done. So we have basically a successive done definition that you can use at the beginning for user story, then a bit more for iteration, and the third piece for the release. Let's take the first example or first part of this is user story done. So here we are in the flow and we've been through testing activities and we're about to go through the demo. And before the demo, we want to make sure that we are really done with our user stories. So some example things we could put into the user story done. Firstly, design, code, and test cases are peer-reviewed for defects. So I think most teams would appreciate that a code review with a couple of colleagues looking at the code can really help find mistakes very quickly and thoroughly. We want to push that up to maybe an earlier step, like test case writing, and maybe design notes or architecture, so we can have the team find mistakes throughout the whole iteration before the end of the user story has been done. Secondly, code has been checked in, so could be check-in with a particular tool, versioned and backed up, and that could be part of our you're not really done yet until you do a check-in. User story test cases are passed, so we are at the pre-demo point. And therefore, we want to make sure that the testing is done correctly. Now, there ideally should be a good acceptance test case written for the user story at that particular point in the backlog. So we want to make sure that is passed correctly. And any defects we've found so far are fixed, deferred, or resolved. So by this, I mean, if they can be fixed and they should be fixed, they're fixed. That's part of our check. They could be good for a later iteration, don't have to be fixed right now. And what I really mean is that they've been resolved. So you know the status of the defects, you know kind of where they are and when they're going to be worked on. User stories and design updated. As teams code and do testing activities, they learn a lot about the requirement in the user story. And so as they learn more, they want to then add the details that they're learning back to the user story definition and the test cases and any design information they put together at that point. User documentation, defined, updated. Now you can certainly delay this till later, the quicker you can do it in smaller increments, the easier it is to do. But it could be kind of delayed until the end of the release or the iteration. So the idea is we want to make sure in our done definition at some point, we actually do work on user definition activities, so we actually can deploy the software later. And then feature is ready for the demo. So we want to make sure the demo goes correctly or well, and therefore the feature should be functioning correctly and the demo would actually work correctly when we do it. Now, of course, teams are going to go through many examples of user stories and learn bit by bit what really is done for them. So my bulleted list here is just a beginning point suggestion, and obviously you want to add to it with your own definitions as you learn in your teams. I think one of the great things about Agile is the forcing function of a retrospective, and we want to really kind of use that time to look at what is actually done or what you define as done, and then refine the list. The next use of done is at the iteration sprint level, and now we're at this point here in our cycle. We want to make sure that our sprint is really done correctly before we go to the next one. And so if we don't do that, we basically drag tasks from that point downstream. And if we do that on a recurring basis, there's a lot of work that kind of builds up as kind of loose ends towards the end of the deadline. So things to look out for here. Committed items are complete. In our sprint planning activity, we decided what the sprint will be defined as, or iteration, and therefore we can check those user stories or features have been complete correctly by that point. If not, what do we do with them? Add them back to the backlog or replan those work items. Tests are complete. Now, at this particular point, there could be many pieces of software you've done already, and therefore we have to do other types of testing on that software to declare the sprint end. So integration testing, performance testing, security, and usability are examples. Again, that is different and above and beyond a regular user story test, because we may have many features now complete by this point. User documentation complete. Again, you can leave this till the next cycle at the release point. However, there's now 3 or 4 months worth of stuff to go work on from a user guide perspective. So you may want to add that to this particular sprint end. So we're going to get that taken care of when the features are close to you and you remember what happened. Demo complete. Again, part of the really magic of Agile is getting the feedback loop of the end user on the system you've built so far. So we want to make sure there's a good demo done and the feedback has been captured and we know what we're going to do with it. Either add the feedback to the backlog for next cycle or fix the demo and do it again. Defects have been fixed, deferred, or resolved. So again, all these activities give you feedback, which is the intent of Agile. We have to then disposition and figure out, where are we on the defects. Again, they may be fixed now as a requirement for the demo. They could be then delayed to the next iteration. And then the product owner or customer accepts the features with no further rework. So part of our done is that we are already done, that feature is really done adequately, and we can actually ship it later if it's when it's ready to ship, and we don't have to go back and do more work on that feature. Version control and backup of requirements design, notes, code, test cases, and test results. Again, we want to make sure part of our done definition that we check in our work and backed it up so we can find it, it's labeled correctly, and we know what state it's actually in. And then retrospective data is collected and actions are planned. Again, part of the magic of Agile is the feedback loop and actually taking action on that. So if we do a good retrospective, we're learning all kinds of things about how we perform. That should be a done. And secondly, take the data and figure out, when are we going to do it? Maybe like now for the next iteration, maybe going to add it to a future iteration to improve that particular part of our activities. Now, of course, teams will go through many examples of iterations. And I think the key thing here is to use the retrospective event to collect that data and partly work on the done definition. So every iteration, done is becoming more solid and more robust going forward. The last definition of done is at the release point. Here we are at the last iteration for the release and about to do a deployment. there could be additional unique things we want to add to our check before we declare done for that. So for example, testing, we have to make sure it installs correctly. That could be a test case. There's a migration pathway, so the user can actually update the data correctly for their new version of the application that you're deploying to them. A backout plan created and tested, that if the deployment goes incorrectly, can you back it out so they can keep on going with their previous version. There could be acceptance testing, where there are many situations that have to be kind of checked, and many maybe stakeholders have to approve the final solution, and that has to be kind of planned into our done definition. User documentation, we can certainly delay this until this point. There's now more work to go work on at this point, but we could do that. We want to make sure that the user can use it, the release notes are correct, installation scripts actually function, user guides, help text, updates to manuals and wizards and whatever have been put into the done definition. Again, that takes time to plan for and allocate, which is kind of how we end up with a done definition and a predictable schedule. User sign-off. This could be non-trivial. There could be many users all over the place that have to try the system out with their data and then approve it. Version control and backup of code, runtime, and release notes. Again, we want to make sure we can find stuff correctly, and when we deploy it, people pick up the right version correctly. That's part of our CMing. And then again, you're going to go through many examples of doing releases, which you want to then kind of learn from in the retrospective and then add back to the definition of done. So really we have one checklist that has 3 parts: user story, sprint, and release. Again, you can use that as you do a major deployment from beginning to end. So in summary, defining done is unique for every team, but does include some common tasks, and I think you can pick out some ideas from my lists in my examples. Thanks for watching the video. For more help on these topics or your Agile implementation, please either post a comment or question below and see the links that are down there also. Thank you.